Pakistan has always played a contradictory role in the war on terror. On one hand, the Pakistani army regularly conducts counterterrorism operations against insurgent and terrorist groups in northwest Pakistan. These large operations come about as a response to terrorist attacks within Pakistan that occur with an alarming frequency. On the other hand, Pakistan, particularly the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, or ISI, have provided financial and material support to the Taliban's insurgency in neighboring Afghanistan throughout the U.S. occupation. The ISI is frequently tied to terrorist attacks within Afghanistan, and Afghans regularly blame the ISI for problems within their country. How can a country that routinely suffers the devastating impacts of terrorism support the same attacks just over their border? We'll talk about it on the Boardwalk.
All right, welcome back to the Boardwalk after I think a much needed week off. I know for me, I did a lot of traveling, so happy to be back this week. We're going to be talking about Pakistan and their role with Afghanistan and in Afghanistan. Before we get into that, I just want to let the listeners know that as much as I dislike Facebook, we did create a Facebook page for the Boardwalk. It is linked on our Instagram page, and I do plan on getting that a little more active here in the coming days. I've got a couple articles in there related to Afghanistan and kind of, our thoughts on certain news pieces that have come out. One of which about how the Taliban themselves were surprised at how quickly they were taking over some of these territories in Afghanistan, specifically in the northern part of Afghanistan, to the point that there's a border crossing between Afghanistan and Tajikistan, and the Taliban are up there checking passports, and they're controlling the flow of traffic in and out of the country. And you've got roughly 140 Afghan security force personnel. I don't know if they're police or army, but they're pretty much stuck in Tajikistan seeking refugee status. So it's been a crazy 2 months since we started the podcast, to say the least, guys.
I mean, just it blows my mind how fast they've taken over. And like you said, I think before we started recording, I was looking at the ABC News interview with General Miller, who's the guy in charge of all the Allied forces there in Afghanistan. He's basically saying, there's going to be a civil war, guys, but that's okay. Like we know that. So I don't know, stuff we've already called out. So you heard it here first, guys. So when the news of the civil war breaks out, just know we told you so.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if the Long War Journal's been calling it out for a long time. You heard it here first, damn it. But man, it's very very interesting seeing all of the different places where they're making such rapid advances, especially areas in the north, and areas outside of their historic power dynamics. But it just goes to show, that relationship with al-Qaida is continuing strong, with all of these al-Qaida related groups that are sort of fitting in where the Taliban are outside of their power base.
Yeah, so, and we're going to get into a lot more detail on that next week. Give ourselves a little more time to read up on some more stuff, but there's a whole lot of shit that's happened in the last 2 months that we're going to tie in together, along with another buddy of ours from our time in Kandahar. But moving backwards into this week is, like I said, the topic's going to be Pakistan. And Pakistan is probably the most important external player. No, not probably. They are the most important external player, especially from the state actor point of view. Pakistan, like we talked about in the Taliban episode, was an early backer and supporter of the Taliban, and that hasn't changed, despite Pakistan continuing to state that they don't have any relationship with al-Qaida or the Taliban, that they don't support these groups from a financial or weapon standpoint. But I mean, they have said that if the Taliban do become the government, that they will reach out and establish diplomatic relations. Well, they've had those relations for like 25 years. And it's a very interesting history when you look at why Afghanistan matters to Pakistan. And to do that, we go back to 1947. Don't worry, we'll get back up to the current time frame very fast. Basically, 1947, Pakistan separates from India, becomes its own country. As everybody knows, Pakistan and India absolutely hate each other, and Pakistan looked to their neighbor to the west, Afghanistan, as a future trade partner, and as somebody that India had already had economic and diplomatic relations with, and they wanted to disrupt those relations, right? Everything, or not everything, but a lot of the things Pakistan does is, how can I piss off India by doing this? And India does the same thing to Pakistan. So it's not like one side is the moral arbiter of justice in this 75-year long dance between those two countries. So you know, the initial interest in Afghanistan was that counter India influence, and that was really the goal until the early 70s, when you had the communist uprising in Afghanistan, and then the Soviets came in 79. So then when that happens, Pakistan's new thing is, well, we need to counter the Soviets. They didn't see them as Western, right? But they saw them as somebody else that was trying to curry favor and influence and develop trade routes in Afghanistan. Afghanistan lies along the traditional Silk Road. It's a pretty important economic area solely for transport. There's a lot of stuff there that you can extract that has economic value, but the country's too corrupt to do it. They've got trillions of dollars worth of minerals that one day somebody will get out of the country. But really, Afghanistan's whole their biggest value is as a road, and so they had that counter Soviet mission basically from 79 to 89.
And it's not just like a road, it's a huge, I mean, I guess a road is, of course, obviously a huge strategic boon to whoever controls it. But it's just in a great area for, especially, I mean, whether you're Western or Soviet at the time, it's in this area where if you can control it, you can launch these attacks and, these upcoming Cold War proxy wars that are going to go on. Like you can project your power and your sphere of influence if you're the United States or the Soviet Union. And it's kind of always been like that, even going back to the 1800s with Britain and their invasion there versus Russia. And it's always been that way. I think, and you guys may disagree with me jumping forward to the now, but I think it's less valuable now with the proliferation of these, with drone warfare, with aircraft with very long dwell times. You don't necessarily have to use Afghanistan as that base, that air base that it once was. So I think it's less important now than it was. I mean, in 20 years, in 2001, hugely important for the war on terror, right? To have a central location now I think less so, but I don't know. I was thinking about that the other day. Aircraft and their advancement kind of have pushed it down a little bit, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can reach out to Western China from Kuwait at this point, pretty well. So definitely, technological advancement has affected it, and I mean, there's a ton of valuable minerals over there, but I don't know. China's about to get their hands on them anyway, so that'll be effective.
Yeah, who wants to be the guy like mining though while the Taliban are taking over the mine? Like it's that's going to be tough to extract any sort of resources. But I'm sure old Papa Elon's going to find him a way to get in there and grab him some lithium. But
Trump was eyeing the lithium for a little bit while I was over there. That was the word.
Yeah, we need it to power our Teslas, but yeah, I mean, back to what you were saying though, Zach. So when the CIA starts its covert operation, to fight the Soviets in Pakistan, you go in and I mean, not fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, but to fight the Soviets with a base out of Pakistan. I mean, that was a huge help when you're training mujahideen and you're working with these guys. So Pakistan played this, anti-Soviet role, like you talked about, and was a staging ground for some of the stuff we did at the time.
Yep. And I will say regarding those minerals in Afghanistan, when I was a young analyst, I think it was 2010, not Ghani, Karzai, the Afghan government and Karzai, they granted China the first rights for mineral excavation. Now, if that was 11 years ago, I don't know if that's still valid, But that'll be interesting. And most of those minerals are in northwest Afghanistan or northeast Afghanistan. And that's really when we talk about the economic importance of Afghanistan, like outside of shit like opium, that's really where it's going to be economically important. One, for those minerals, and two, that northern part it's warm enough in the summer and stuff that's the trade route. If you could ever get that country stable enough, because over the road trucking is still a thing worldwide. Um, but then moving over to so I wrote down 5 reasons why Afghanistan and Pakistan are pretty much symbiotic and or co-relative, whatever term you want to use. The fourth one is the cultural similarities between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and but Afghanistan is very unique in that ethnically, even though we got Tajiks and Uzbeks and Pashtuns, like ethnically, most of the country is Persian, right? They all speak a dialect of Persian, but they're all Sunni Muslim, like Pakistan, and the ties are more in that Sunni Muslim range than they are that ethnic Persian, because you've got Baluchistan, which is in Iran and Pakistan, so they've got those relationships at more of the local tribal level, but from a diplomatic level, they'll look at their cultural cousin, if you will, in Pakistan. And then probably the biggest reason why Afghanistan matters to Pakistan is because, picture we're the U.S. Let's say next year something happens. Canada's got some of the largest oil reserves in the world, and those dry out, and Canada's hit with stagflation, and the locals just have an uprising. They kick Trudeau out. It would be in our best interest that whoever succeeds him is on our side and can provide a stable government. That's basically what Pakistan has done with the Taliban. They backed their hand in 1994, and with that saw the massive gains they made. They doubled down on that support for the Taliban, and with the hopes that the Taliban would become the government, and they'd already have those diplomatic and economic ties, which they did. And that has been what's kept this relationship going on for the better part of approaching 3 decades.
Yeah, so essentially they put their money on that horse back in '94, and we're just they're still running with it because they know they'll have an ally once they get into power. And I think that's a safe bet, though. With all that's been going on, I think that was a really good bet by Pakistan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
I was going to say that investment's about to bear fruit. And I mean, they've and I mean throughout the entire time, even when the Taliban were, pretty pushed pretty far down, like pre Iraq, like sort of winding down and sort of the re-rise of the Taliban in a lot of these areas. We didn't really have a lot of big successes going after like Taliban members in Pakistan. There's a couple of reasons for that we'll get into, but you besides Osama bin Laden, you we never found Omar, we never found a lot of the key guys high up in the council there.
Yeah, and the relationship, like we said, the relationship goes back to '94, but then culturally, or not even culturally, but historically, recent history, the Afghans see that relationship going back to the '80s. With the refugee influx to Pakistan, with the madrasas in Pakistan that were used by the Taliban in the '90s to recruit these new fighters. That's really where it comes from. So this is a relationship that really spans about 36, 37 years. Uh, you know, and we played a big part in that. The first 10 years from '79 to '89, being that we had that interest and we didn't want the Soviet Union to expand. Like our whole thing was we just didn't want them to expand. That's why we took issues in Vietnam, because we didn't want that communist expansion. Same thing with North Korea in the '50s, or the Korean Peninsula in the '50s. And so that's originally how we got involved. And ultimately, we were the ones funding the groups that would eventually become the Mujahideen, that could not consolidate in the South, and that would eventually consolidate as the Taliban. And because we had that relationship, and because Charlie Wilson's War is a movie that people have seen, whenever Pakistan says that they're not supporting or funding the Taliban, everybody on the planet knows that's a straight up fucking lie, right? Because they have an interest.
Right, and And that's what I talked about kind of in the intro today, is that it's such a strange, I, I don't know. It's like everyone knows you're lying, right? We all know it. Everyone knows Pakistan lies, but we have to like just play along with the lie or something. It's like hyper normalization, which is a great one of my favorite documentaries of all time. It's
Well,
like the hyper normalization of this, right? We all know something's terribly wrong, but we all play along with it, and we just go with it. Like, yeah, I mean, Pakistan supports Taliban even though they say they don't, but and we just accept it. We don't do anything about it. It's weird. It's just such a weird thing.
it's absolutely maddening, right? And did you see? There's a Washington Post op-ed written by Imran Khan, who's the president of Pakistan. Did you guys see that op-ed?
When was that?
It
I know
was
he's written some before.
he released it last week, and it's the title, and the people that write the op-ed, they don't create the title, right? But the title is Pakistan is ready to be a partner for peace in Afghanistan, but we will not host U.S. bases. Well, okay, that's fine. That I mean, that first part is utter bullshit. They're to an extent, yeah, they do want to be a partner for peace, but they wanted to be on their terms, and their terms is a Taliban government, which they'll probably get early next year, possibly at the latest. But that second part about not having a U.S. base in Pakistan, that doesn't really matter. We were able to fly in to Abbottabad in May of 2011, 1 mile from their military academy, and kill bin Laden, who they said they didn't know was there. So it's not like we need a military base in Pakistan because, like Stu said, I think it was Stu, that we can reach Western China from Kuwait, so we can definitely reach
Right.
Afghanistan from Kuwait, or maybe we reestablish that relationship with Kyrgyzstan or maybe Tajikistan. Like, we'll have partners that we can use to do that, right? But he starts off, our countries have the same interests in the long suffer. They have same interests in the long suffering country, a political settlement, stability, economic development, denial of any haven for terrorists. So that is so
That ignores the Quetta Shura, of course.
yeah. So we're going to go ahead and let me translate that for the non-intel folks who are listening to this. When they say deny any haven for terrorists, what they mean is deny any haven for terrorists unless their targets are India. And the best example of that is Lashkar-e-Taiba, who very famously had the Mumbai hotel attack in, I want to say that was 2009, 2010.
2008 or 9. I
It was-
think I've got it pulled up here.
It was very early in my military service, right? And that was Lashkar-e-Taiba, which, yes, the president of Pakistan, excuse me, Imran Khan is not wrong when he says, like, oh, Pakistan doesn't support these groups. He's right. They don't. The ISI does. The ISI is, and we've said this before, the Inter-Services Intelligence, which I think is a weird name, is Pakistan's version of the CIA. It is the exact same concept. Shadow budget, don't know how many people are there, but we'll hear every now and then when they fuck up. We don't really hear when they have their successes. That's by design, right? Same with the CIA. We don't know when they do things well, because what's the point if the world knows that they were the reason why Panama's got a new president this year.
It's like Nancy Reagan doesn't think you should be able to smoke crack, but that doesn't mean the CIA won't sell it to you.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite conspiracies.
Conspiracy. I think that was pretty much proven.
We'll throw that on the Q episode.
We'll put it on that. We're talking about that later.
I believe it.
It is possible. But
yeah, it's really weird because like they have this weird dichotomy where, like, a lot of high-ranking Taliban either live there all year or head there during the winter. And on top of that, you have like a separate sister group called the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan that are operating within Pakistan, that are like related to the group that you're supporting, but they're focused primarily on Pakistan. So and there's a huge amount of terror attacks within Pakistan as well that the ISI and their military are trying to combat. But they have a lot going on. They're about as complex as the CIA, really, when it comes to, like, we need to take this dictator down, and now we have another 10-year war going on in this area. Yeah.
So in episode, go ahead, Kyle.
No, I was gonna say, it's like you said, it's maddening though, because it's so damn complicated. because all these players are playing themselves essentially and against each other, and you're like, well, I mean, it would be one thing to say, well, I mean, but I guess at the end of the day, the U.S. does it too, right? Well, I mean, we say, well, we don't support terrorists, but I mean, look at the Syria uprising, where we funnel weapons to these jihadist groups,
where we supported some freedom-loving freedom fighters out there.
Yeah, and they end up fighting each other, right? And like there was an article where like one group sponsored by the Department of Defense was fighting another group sponsored by the CIA, with the same weapons. Like it's absurd. That's kind of how I feel.
Maybe
about
if they had shared their intel,
if they shared,
maybe if they shared their intel, this wouldn't be a problem.
But yeah, I
just talk about this.
I imagine similar shit goes on with the ISI. Like I'm betting there's like interdepartmental like rivalries for power as people are moving up and shit. And so maybe somebody this Haqqani contingent is their baby, and this other group is fostering like the Paktika based Taliban, and they're trying like your career's tied with how well your cross-border insurgency group is doing, things like that.
That's such a good point. That is a very good point.
Because the Pakistani ISI is a government entity, just like the CIA is, and government entities are inherently flawed, I have no doubt that there's like an ISI chief up in the federally administered tribal areas that just fucking hates the Haqqani network because like Siraj Haqqani was late for a meeting one day. He's like, fuck that guy. We're not going to do anything to help him out. We'll help out al-Qaida, but he better not show up again because I'm not fucking doing a thing to help him. I have no doubt that happens.
There was someone whose career was ruined by the Hig becoming less of a player after the war, man.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Point. There was some dude, he's like a captain. He's like, oh, I got it made. Gulbuddin's back in the game. I'll get him. We'll get aligned with them. That's another power player in the East. And he's like, nah, I'm a politician in Afghanistan now. It's like, well, I guess I'm retiring.
Yeah, that's going to kick you out of the ISI pretty quick, or at least have you relegated to making coffee.
Right.
But
yeah.
So
you're the office chai boy. Jeez.
Yeah, you got to wonder if these are not little individual projects cooked up by higher up people at the ISI that just kind of go off the rails sometimes, and then because that's really that's maybe the only way to explain how absolutely stupid complex this is.
Oh, it's insane.
Is that the ISI is not like got some overarching goal. It's just a bunch of other people with little goals that they're trying to carry out.
Yeah,
well, I mean that's the CIA, right? That's the best way to describe it. It's a headless dog with a bunch of different compartments that are all like supposed to be working towards the same goal, but they have their different ideas of which regime to topple to do it.
On, right? God, okay, listen, NordVPN, if you're listening, we need that sponsorship, that YouTube sponsorship, man.
I can't afford that good of a VPN. Please help us out. No, it's funny you bring that up because I think outside of the Taliban, I don't think the ISI is, well, Taliban and al-Qaida, right? I think all these other little branch splinter groups or whatever you want to call them, cousin networks, they don't really care about, right? They're pet projects here and there. So I'd be very interested to see, like, in the next year or so, what happens when you do have the Taliban, running Afghanistan. You're still going to get that support to groups like the IMU and the Turkestan Islamic movement out of China and shit like that.
This is going to be an interesting year coming up. I mean.
It is.
For all of our entire adult lives, we've been in Afghanistan, so
right,
it's definitely going to change.
Yeah, I mean, we may still be there in some capacity.
It's all cyclical anyway. Somebody's always planning to invade Afghanistan anyway, so it'll come around again.
In episode 6, we talked about the PolitiFact tracker of President Obama as it relates to his overseeing of the war in Afghanistan. And there was a promises kept dating back to October of 2009 that we would withhold funding for Pakistan unless they stopped openly harboring terrorist organizations. And that was considered a promises kept by whoever runs PolitiFact. I think it's the Washington Post, but don't quote me on that. Because like after President Obama came out and said that, Pakistan did roll up a couple of Islamic extremists, I believe, from al-Qaida or the Taliban. And you know, despite doing that, in the 12 years since that happened, they're still, the ISI is still funding these groups, right? We talk about it very regularly that they're funding these groups. And whenever there is a big attack in Afghanistan, every local will say, oh, Pakistan, the ISI did this. And in a way, they're right? Because these groups are being funded by them and they're being armed and trained by them. Uh, but that's not necessarily untrue about Pakistan and their counterterrorism operations within their own borders. Chief among those targets is the TTP, or the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan. They are not related to the Taliban. It's an Arabic term or an Arabic name. Students of Pakistan. I don't know I can't remember off the top of my head what Tariq means. It's like the army. No, Lashkar's army, but it's a militant group that is basically fighting Pakistan for whatever reason. Maybe because Pakistan's got some Punjabs. I'm not sure why they're so pissed off at Pakistan. But that's who Pakistan really focuses their counterterrorism operations on within the country. Separate from that, they do and they have arrested members of al-Qaida, members of the Taliban. I think the most famous person or most known person is Mullah Barater, who we talked about in the first episode. He was Mullah Omar's number 2, his right-hand man. Mullah Barater is now, or was, the chief negotiator for the Taliban in, was it Doha last year? So he made it out just fine. And what happens whenever, so basically we being the U.S., not we being Kyle, Stu, and Zach, but we put pressure on Pakistan that they need to do more to counter these terrorists or insurgent movements. And Pakistan will go out and they'll very kindly arrest somebody like a Mullah Barater, give him a sat phone and a map, put him under house arrest and armed guard, basically ISI-funded bodyguards. And he lives just like that for like 7 or 8 years. And then they release him and they go right back to what they're doing, working within the Taliban or al-Qaida or the Haqqani network, right? So it's a very tongue-in-cheek effort by Pakistan to say, oh, look, see, we're doing something to counter terrorism. And I hadn't really thought about this until Stu brought it up when we talked about it in episode 6, I think, that we give Pakistan, a nuclear country, fucking money. Why? One, ideologically, I'm opposed to all foreign aid just because it's not constitutional. But I'm not going to get on that soapbox. The fact that we're giving a country that has nuclear capabilities foreign aid to counter Islamic extremist organizations when they're immediately funding them, and that's open source everywhere, is absolutely insane.
Yeah, and I mean, dude, if you're gonna look at the list of sketchy places we've given money to, continue to give money to, I mean,
China.
Pakistan's probably China. Pakistan's probably down that list. I don't know. It's really crap. I agree, man. It does suck. And actually, I was just looking it up. It looks like watch Special Envoy. It reminds me of that Warren Zevon song, which is a badass song, by the way. Zalmay Khalilzad, in 2018, he said that Barater was ordered released by the United States, and he did sign the agreement of withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan on behalf of the Taliban. So maybe that's why we ordered him released or something. But not like it matters because it's all gonna. I mean, they win, whatever. It's just interesting.
Going slightly off topic with that initial signature that we got. Do you guys think that if the original date had been kept, we'd be seeing like any notable differences with the current situation?
No,
because we were initially going to leave in May, right? Wasn't that what the previous administration set up?
They'd probably be a month ahead of schedule.
Yeah. Basically, just get the guys back in country, bro. Let's go.
Yeah, which that's gonna. Pakistan's gonna have their hands full when we're fully out of the country for sure.
Oh yeah.
Like when we look at the relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban and al-Qaida and the Haqqani network and Lashkar-e-Taiba, which was initially funded by bin Laden, and like I said in the first part, when when we had the raid on Bin Laden's compound, as far as I know, we did not tell Pakistan about it. It was in Abbottabad, Pakistan, 1 mile away from their equivalent of West Point. Utterly crazy, right? Large ass compound. And I don't think there's anybody that believes Pakistan when Pakistan says they didn't know that Bin Laden was there.
Of course.
Right. And I don't know where Zawahiri is. Some people say he's up in the Fatah, which is possible, right? The Fatah is just like the fucking Wild West of Pakistan. So it's absolutely possible that he's up there. But maybe not. But I guarantee you the ISI knows where he is. At least somebody within the ISI, probably one individual, maybe two, but somebody probably knows where he's at. And you see that when you look at the Taliban shuras. And as we've said before, shura is a term, means council, basically. And the Taliban has two shuras. They have the Peshawar Shura, which is the lesser of the two shuras, but then they have the Quetta Shura, or the Quetta Shura, depending on your preferred pronunciation, which is in southern Pakistan. It's less than an hour to Kandahar province, and that's where the Taliban senior leadership operates out of. Well, Quetta, Pakistan is not exactly, little podunk Marfa, Texas with 800 people. There's 1 million people in Quetta. It's a urban area, and the Taliban, they operate freely down there because by operating, they're just kind of walking around and having meetings. They obviously don't conduct any military actions in Pakistan, but this is widely known, readily available, and it's the most direct way that Pakistan provides them with aid is by providing them with a safe haven to operate out of. I think a great example of that is, the Taliban, they're on their third leader, right? Mullah Habatullah Akhundzada. I think he's been a pretty good Amir, right? I think he's done, like, if I were to think like a Taliban fighter, which part of being an intel analyst is you do that. If I think as a Taliban fighter or a regional commander, like, he's done a pretty damn good job of stabilizing the Taliban control in Afghanistan and, implanting the footprint or blueprint to move forward to where they are now. Well, before him was a man named Mullah Mansour. And Mullah Mansour was, he was named the Emir in a rather controversial manner. There were claims that he killed Mullah Omar, which nobody will ever know for sure, except for Mullah
He'd been
Mansour.
pretending Mullah Omar was alive for 3 years and basically speaking
Right.
with his voice without almost anyone knowing. I assume he kept it secret from most of the Quetta Shura as well, or else
It's a lot easier to do that when you're a notoriously hard to find and talk to human being. It's a lot, it's like there's 2 photos of Mullah Omar, so it's like, it's a lot easier to pretend somebody's alive when nobody's seen the man ever.
And then
So
doing
that's
that,
working for him.
they lost the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan for a while to the Islamic State in the Khorasan province because they took issue with that. But that's neither here nor there. So, Mullah Mansour, he was controversial. He was kind of seen as not really the greatest commander. He wasn't seen as a very devout Wahhabist. And somehow we were able to, throw a fucking Predator missile on his ass when he was coming back to Pakistan from Iran. It's like, oh, so these guys are reachable. How is it all of a sudden he's reachable, but we can't do a single thing about the other guys, right? I'm going to throw out a conspiracy, which I don't think is a conspiracy at all, but I think Pakistan hand-fed us his whereabouts.
Oh, for sure. And maybe put in somebody a little bit more, I don't know, that they could handle better.
More qualified.
Yeah, and when going back to he's a good Emir. Of course he is. I mean, that's kind of the understatement of the year. I mean, he's about to be leader of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
That's a hell of an Emir, dude, to come back from fighting an insurgency to about to take over most of the country.
Yeah. And man, there's gonna. We've there's the speculative differences with how are we dealing with a new softer Taliban nowadays? Who the hell knows how they're going to rule? But I think one thing's probably a lot more likely is that he's going to be front and center as opposed to Omar, who was kind of chilling, and Kandahar being that being where he felt most comfortable since it's such a holy place for the country. But I think then this next leader of the country is actually going to probably at least be in Kabul more often than Omar was.
Yeah, for sure. And no, I still think when he comes in, he'll want to pretty much base the operations out of Kandahar, just because the
Yeah.
South is the ancestral home of the Taliban, if you will. If they're old enough for that to be called their ancestral home, that's really where it all resonates from. And I think they may even try to officially move the capital to Kandahar. So if the CIA is smart, they bulldozed Omar's old compound before they left, but they probably didn't. You know, but
I don't know. You got some third generational fighters out there at this point.
yeah, that's a good point.
Call it
True.
ancestral.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know I think whether or not they're able to move their base of operations back into Afghanistan is largely going to depend on the U.S. response to the outbreak of, I mean, more open fighting in the Civil War. I think that's already going on now, but what are we going to do when U.S. troops are out of there? Like, what's the U.S. response going to be?
Drones.
And I mean, what's and then and we'll just segue from that, I guess, um, into kind of these. Zach mentioned the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan a second ago. So um, IMU is just one of several, and we've talked about them on other episodes of the podcast. So, and Tehrik-i-Taliban and all these other groups. I mean, and a lot of these groups have been operating out of a place kind of between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it's technically part of Pakistan now. Especially in 2018, I think it was officially incorporated into that province of Pakistan called the federally administered tribal areas, which is kind of a semi-autonomous region in Pakistan. You've probably heard of the Khyber Pass. That's where that is, and it's kind of this hotbed of Pashtun, ethnic Pashtuns between Pakistan and Afghanistan, where these movements and these terrorist groups, due to lack of control, lack of oversight, or other reasons, are able to basically thrive and operate. And they're able to move kind of between Pakistan proper and into Afghanistan using this really volatile section of the map, essentially. So I think we'll move into talking about Fatah now.
So the Fatah, when we were when we were minutes away from getting Bin Laden, and what was it, like mid 2002 or something like that? When he escaped, he went into the Fatah, right? So that goes back to being a base of operations. That goes back to the Soviet-Afghan War, right? That's where the refugee camps are at for Afghans. Like you had a lot of them down in the Baluchistan province, which is where Quetta is at. And you had a lot up in the Fatah, which is probably part of why you see that large, almost predominant or almost exclusively Sunni Pashtun population up there, right? So it's always operated, or it's always served as a not to use this term this way, but a safe space or a safe operating area for these extremist groups, be they the IMU, the LET, the al-Qaeda's, Haqqani networks, Taliban's of the world. Like there's a couple news articles over the years of al-Qaeda training camps that were finally done away with up there, which I'm sure that was like a pre-negotiated thing where we're gonna hey, al-Qaeda, this is the ISI, wink wink, nod nod, we're gonna bomb this training camp in approximately 4 days at noon, so be best if you guys aren't there, like shit like that. Like that's what the Fatah has served as. It's also been a problem for Pakistan because of that TTP presence, and that's where most of their counterterrorism operations stem from. But the biggest thing is that is the direct safe haven for pretty much all non-Taliban groups, right? I think the Taliban can pretty much operate freely throughout all of Pakistan as long as it's in an administrative or oversight role.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really easy to get to, especially in the more mountainous areas. Like so, Afghanistan's borders are just insanely porous. Like yes, there's a lot of mountains from the Hindu Kush moving down from China along their like northern and eastern fronts, but there are just like hundreds of donkey trails, so and tunnels, right? From when we first invaded, they'd built tunnels like through the mountains, so it's very easy for them to get to the other side if they have to, and it's an easy way for even lower level fighters that need to lay low for a little while to get out of the action and then come back later. And certainly over the winter, some mid-level guys that aren't necessarily going to Peshawar and Quetta, come over to avoid the action. Well, that is if they aren't just purposely getting caught to enjoy Kabul's prisons, because outside of like if you're not a high enough level to be like a suspect who might know where like Omar is, or where some of the high level guys are, then it's just like kind of a regular prison where they feed you and keep you warm. Like we definitely suspected a few guys of just not caring about going to prison because it was cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just get picked up. I don't know if I'd
Yeah.
want to go to any Rozak operated prison though, man.
Oh no.
No.
I think I'll take the cold Afghan
No.
winter over that.
Yeah. It's better than coming back missing a couple of digits or maybe a limb or a lung or a heartbeat. It's like, yeah. And I look at Fatah, I see that. I'm going to compare it to my time in Iraq. So Iraq is like 60% Shia and 40% Sunni. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni Muslim, but he was an Arab fascist, right? It was a relatively secular government. Well, when we went into Iraq and we ran through the Iraqi army and we created that power vacuum, it was a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You had the Sunni West, which bordered Saudi Arabia, and the Sunni North, which bordered Shia Syria. And then you had the Shia East and the Shia South. And so that created, like I said, a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And so we have all these Iranian-backed militias in Iraq now that are being, funded and trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, right? And I think more people are familiar with that and with people like Qasem Soleimani than they are with what's going on in Pakistan. So if you are in any way familiar with that, that's exactly take that, shift it over a couple countries, and that's what Pakistan is doing in the Fatah. And part of that is that counter-Iranian influence, because Iran, at the end of the day, while they are also providing support to the Taliban because they hate America, well, that support's probably going to dry out pretty soon. And they are a Shia Muslim country, and Afghanistan doesn't have a very large Shia population, but there is a Shia population that Iran will want to protect, and so they're going to maintain some interest in the country, which means they'll have to counter Pakistan. So Pakistan can use the Fatah for that. They can use it to train up insurgents or militants who can go into southern Helmand and Nimruz and have clashes with the Iranians on the border, or go into places like what's above Dekundi and Gore, where you have the Shia Hazara populations. Right? I think Fatah, it really could be more important at a regional level after we are gone, because there's a very good chance you see a lot of those fighters flood into Afghanistan, be they Pakistan or be they Taliban fighters, be they AQ fighters, who I don't think any of us believe for a second the Taliban will say, no, you can't come into Afghanistan. Right, considering that.
Yeah, thanks for all the support these last 20
Exactly.
years and the training. Like
Exactly. So Al-Qaeda. So for the listeners, whenever there's a new leader, or it's done almost at an annual basis, all the various Islamic extremist groups throughout the world, they'll pledge their allegiance. I believe the term is bayat, and they don't pledge it to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda pledges their allegiance to the Taliban. That's the fucking pecking order, right? It's not the other way around. So I think you'll have the Taliban go back into Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then Al-Qaeda, who Siraj Haqqani, who is the number 2 or 3 in the Taliban, depending on how you look at it, the leader of the very heavily ISI-funded Haqqani network, who very famously captured Bo Bergdahl, he's also listed as an Al-Qaeda military commander. Yet the U.S. sits there, and our State Department says that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban do not have an operational relationship, which is utter fucking nonsense.
Well, so I think part of that is we're getting off on a technicality with being able to negotiate with the Taliban if they aren't a terrorist group that's affiliated with terrorist groups. Like the State Department, the Department of Defense, we've always classified the Taliban as an insurgency ever since the initial invasion.
So I saw a news article today. Obviously we are very ahead of our scheduled withdrawal of September 11th. Now they're saying we'll be gone in about the next 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from now, the Taliban will be a political party.
Yeah.
And
Right,
that's the reality.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, they'll basically be the political party.
In
Like, it's not going to be like the
60%
Hague.
of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Hague will have their little pocket in the east, but the Taliban will have the south. At this rate, they'll have like Mazar-e Sharif just out of fear.
Yeah.
You know,
So Siraj is going to go plant his flag in, I don't know, Ghazni or Paktia, rule his kingdom, and then that's going to be that.
I mean, basically, he wants P2K in Ghazni.
Yeah,
That's
it's
really
it's
all
what
he
it's what
cares
his
about.
father. It's familially his, from his father's days. Yeah.
P2K for the listeners is Paktia, Paktika, and Coast, or not Coast.
Kapisa.
Coast.
Kapisa.
No,
It's
no,
Kapisa.
it's coast.
Kapisa.
It's Kapisa.
No, Kapisa is northeast of Kabul. Paktia, Paktika, and Coast. I might have covered these back in the day.
Okay, you're right. I think you're probably right.
What do you know about Coast? Okay, it's one of the K provinces. I have no doubt that it's Coast, right? But historically, that's what the Akhanis have cared about. That's where their family, that's where the bloodlines are from. Siraj's father, Jalaluddin, they have a funny name, Jalaluddin, and then he gave his other son's name was Anas. How simple is that? Jalaluddin Haqqani was like an old school OG Mooj member during the Soviet-Afghan War, who we backed financially, which he took that money, partnered with bin Laden. And so by default, we indirectly funded the Haqqani network and al-Qaida and the Taliban and the Hig. Everybody except Massoud. That's the crazy thing. Like we were sitting here, like if you've ever seen Charlie Wilson's War, it's right there. But if you haven't seen Charlie Wilson's War, there's a part where they're talking about which of these Mujahideen fighters do we back, and the CIA decided to back all these Islamic extremist groups, and they decided not to back the Western-educated, trilingual, absolute great military commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was the head of the Northern Alliance, and that created our 40-year tango with Pakistan.
And he's dead, and the rest of them are still kicking in the government.
Yeah. Well, when you got CIA protection, you live longer.
Very true. Very true.
You think Dalstom's like out in Mazar-e Sharif, like shoring things up there right now?
I think he might be getting ready to board another plane to Turkey.
I think he might be able to get the hell out.
He lived through one occupation. I don't know. That guy's hardcore. As terrible a person as he is, he's pretty damn hardcore.
But he's old and fat now.
There's also a good chance
he was old and fat when we invaded.
Yeah, he can't ride a horse, I don't think, very well anymore.
Based on the books I've read about the Taliban, there's also a very good chance that he's just going to broker a peace deal with them, and they'll give him Maz and leave him alone.
Yeah, I mean, and he does negotiate with the Taliban on our behalf in prisoner exchanges. We've done that before.
Well, even prior to U.S. involvement, starting in 2001, when the Taliban were running roughshod and they were cleared through Nimruz and Herat and Farah, and they were moving to the north, Dostum had reached out to Mullah Omar and offered like a fucking truce, right? He has made a truce or an agreement with like every major Mujahideen commander out there since like 1984.
He's certainly one out pragmatic.
There. He's super pragmatic. He's there's a reason why he's fat and he's unhealthy, but he's alive. Like there's a reason for that.
Yep, he keeps it 100, as the kids say up there.
He does. Now the real question: what does Pakistan do in 2 weeks? Right when all U.S. troops are gone and it's just flat out, it's an open. I mean, it's a civil war now, but it'll be a civil war without any Westerners around to even think about pulling a trigger. Right? I don't. Does Pakistan? Are they just going to provide like command and control or guidance or suggestions?
I would say
to
so.
The Taliban,
and they probably send ISI agents there to augment Taliban forces. I'd imagine if I were smart.
I'd say probably some material support, but it's on the like you come over, pick it up, and bring it back with you basis, because they're still like in the international community. So there's certain things that they can't be seen doing.
But I think they'll embed.
Kyle, I think they already have.
Forces. Oh yeah. No, absolutely, yeah. But I think you'll see more of it. I think you'll see ISI commanders in Taliban garb directing combat operations.
And I think it'll probably be that way, at least, like I said, at least until there's a clear-cut winner to this active civil war, which at this rate, with how quickly the Taliban are moving through and gaining territory, to the point that like they got like 4 districts in Badakhshan, which we were joking about a couple weeks ago, that they would never really do anything, and they control half the damn province now. I think it's very possible you might see. I think Ghani will try to put up a fight with his fighters. You'll see some resistance in the traditional Northern Alliance areas like Panjshir. But ultimately, the Taliban will. I mean, they're going to run the damn country.
I mean, the only reason a provincial capital hasn't fallen yet is because we're still there. Like the day after we leave provincial, like I'm assuming at least 3 or 4 provincial capitals will be attacked.
I think they'll just walk into Lashkar-Gah and take Helmand.
Yeah,
I think that's. I mean, they've even at the height of the surge, when we were our most effective in Afghanistan, Helmand was still untamable, right? So they'll get Helmand, and I like we were saying, I'm pretty sure that there's already ISI operatives in all of these provinces fighting side by side with the Taliban. At minimum, they're with the those shadow provincial governors and those shadow district governors, and they're providing advice and counsel, right? And I think that's really been the big push over the last couple years, when it became pretty obvious, even with the election of Donald Trump, maybe even more so because he was so openly opposed to continuing the war in Afghanistan. It started to become obvious that the writing was on the wall that this was going to end. And so you saw with Habatullah coming in, that pivot to establishing good jurisprudence and governance throughout the districts and the provinces while maintaining a military presence. And so I think because they did that, you're going to see you're going to see Pakistan, the ISI, take a step back. They're going to be essentially their train advise assist that we tried to do. They're basic, and they're acting as train advise assist right now for the Taliban. The problem is it's really just advise assist at this point.
Can we pick our counterparts to replace this in the new government?
Let's see. Can't wait to see the ISI's SFAB element coming out there.
I wonder if they'll just like pay some of the contractors out there ISI money to just swap over.
I don't want Pakistani rupees.
Yeah, that's true.
Pay me in bullion.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Boardwalk Podcast. Just a reminder, we do have the Instagram post up, and with a link to the Facebook page, like the boomers that we are becoming. Zach has made a Facebook page for our podcast, so you guys can interface with us and interface with like we're a machine. Anyway, that you can talk to us, leave suggestions and things you'd like to see. Next week, we should have a special guest next week, and we're going to talk about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That's using air assets to do that intelligent work. So me and Matt, not the same Matt that was on a couple weeks ago, but a different Matt, hopefully be talking about. It is Matt, right?
No, it's Adam.
Adam.
He was ISR Matt, but it's Adam.
That's right. Yeah, that's where I'm getting that from. Sorry, Adam. Yeah, ISR Matt. That's where I'm getting the Matt from. Yeah, he'll be on, and we'll be talking about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So get those twin prop planes ready and your drones, and join us next week.